The first gunshot ripped through the still morning air of Willow Creek as Olivia Cooper stood frozen on her front porch, watching in horror as her father collapsed in the dirt street below. It was 1876, and in this unforgiving corner of the Arizona Territory, justice came not from a courtroom but from the barrel of a gun. She had known there would be trouble when the Blackwell Gang rode into town, but she never imagined they would murder her father in cold blood over a land dispute. "Pa!" she screamed, lifting her skirts and racing down the porch steps despite her aunt's desperate calls to stay inside. The world blurred around her as she ran, dust swirling in her wake, the hem of her blue cotton dress dragging through the dirt. Sheriff Thompson and his deputy were nowhere to be found, and the small crowd that had gathered seemed unwilling to step forward against the 5 armed men who sat proudly atop their horses. Olivia dropped to her knees beside her father, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest, but even as she did, she knew it was too late. William Cooper had been the only family she had left after her mother died 3 years earlier. Now, at 20 years old, she was truly alone. "This is what happens to folks who don't understand business," Silas Blackwell declared from atop his stallion, his voice carrying across the hushed Main Street. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Olivia. "Consider this a warning to anyone else who thinks they can refuse to sell to me. I want every piece of land from here to the river." Through her tears, Olivia glared up at the man who had just destroyed her world. "You won't get away with this," she said, her voice shaking with grief and rage. Blackwell merely laughed, tipping his hat mockingly before signaling to his men. They turned their horses and rode out of town, leaving Olivia cradling her father's lifeless body in the middle of the street. The following days passed in a blur of grief. The funeral was small but dignified, attended by most of the townsfolk who had respected William Cooper, a hard-working rancher who had helped build Willow Creek from nothing. Olivia stood dry-eyed at the graveside, having cried herself empty over the previous nights. Her father's closest friend, Mr. Henderson, read from the Bible while Olivia clutched her mother's worn silver locket, her last connection to her parents. After the mourners departed, Olivia remained, staring at the fresh mound of earth. The Cooper Ranch would now be hers to manage alone, nearly 200 acres of promising land that bordered the river. Land that Silas Blackwell wanted desperately enough to kill for. "Miss Cooper," a deep voice startled her from her thoughts. "I'm mighty sorry about your father." Olivia turned to find a man she didn't recognize standing a respectful distance away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing trail-worn clothes and a dust-covered hat. His face was partially shadowed, but she could see strong features framed by dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Thank you," she replied automatically, though her tone was guarded. Strangers in Willow Creek were viewed with suspicion these days. "Name's Vaughn Zachary," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "I rode in just after. What happened?" "I was meant to meet with your father about some business." Olivia studied him more carefully. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, and a faint scar ran along his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking blue that seemed to see right through her. "What business would that be, Mr. Zachary? Your father wrote to me about buying some cattle. I've got a small herd I was driving north looking to sell." He shifted his weight, appearing uncomfortable. "I don't mean to intrude on your grief, Miss Cooper. I can be on my way." "No," Olivia said quickly, surprising herself. "The ranch still needs cattle. My father's death doesn't change that." Something flickered in Vaughn's eyes, admiration, perhaps. "You planning to run the ranch yourself? I don't have much choice." She lifted her chin defiantly. "I've worked alongside my father since I was a girl. I know what needs to be done," Vaughn nodded slowly. It's a lot for one person, especially with Blackwell and his men making trouble. You know about Blackwell, word travels fast. Seems he's been buying up or forcing out most of the small ranchers in these parts. He hesitated before adding, I also heard he's the one who shot your father. He is, Olivia confirmed, her hands clenching into fists. Sheriff Thompson says there's nothing to be done about it. No witnesses willing to testify. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. The law can be mighty slow in these parts, Vaughn agreed, replacing his hat. Sometimes justice comes by other means. There was something in his tone that made Olivia look at him more carefully. Are you offering help, Mr. Zachary? I'm just passing through, he said, but his eyes told a different story. Though I reckon I could stick around a few days, help you look over that cattle I brought. Make sure they're settling in properly if you decide to buy. Olivia wasn't naive enough to believe that was his only reason for staying, but she found herself nodding anyway. I'd appreciate that. The ranch house has a spare room if you need a place to stay. Vaughn's eyes widened slightly. That's mighty trusting of you, Miss Cooper. Mrs. Finch, our housekeeper, lives in the house as well, Olivia added quickly. And I keep my father's shotgun loaded. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'd expect nothing less. As they walked back toward town together, Olivia felt the weight of curious stares. A young, unmarried woman offering lodging to a stranger would certainly set tongues wagging in Willow Creek. But with Blackwell's threats hanging over her, having someone like Vaughn Zachary around might be worth the gossip. Little did she know that this meeting would change the course of her life forever. The Cooper Ranch lay 5 miles outside of town, a sprawling property that backed up to a river, the very water source that made it so valuable to Blackwell and his schemes. The main house was modest but solid, built by William Cooper's own hands when he first settled the land 15 years earlier. Behind it stood a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals for the livestock. Olivia rode her mare alongside Vaughn's stallion, keeping a careful distance. She still wasn't sure what to make of him or why she had so impulsively invited him to stay. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence he exuded, or the way his eyes hardened when Blackwell's name was mentioned. That's quite a piece of land your father built up, Vaughn commented as they crested a hill that offered a view of the entire property. It wasn't easy, Olivia replied. The first few years nearly broke him. Drought, cattle thieves, Apache raids, but he never gave up. Pride crept into her voice despite her grief. He always said the land would provide if we respected it. Wise man. Vaughn's gaze swept across the horizon. I can see why Blackwell wants it. He's building some kind of empire, Olivia explained. He came to town about a year ago, started buying up properties, talking about progress and prosperity. When people wouldn't sell, accidents started happening. Fires, livestock going missing, wells getting poisoned. And no one stands against him. Most folks are too scared, those who aren't. She trailed off, the memory of her father's bloodied body still fresh in her mind. They rode in silence until they reached the ranch house. Mrs. Finch, a plump woman in her 50s who had worked for the Coopers since Olivia was a child, emerged from the house looking concerned. Olivia. I was starting to worry, she called before her eyes settled suspiciously on Vaughn. And who might this be? Mrs. Finch, this is Mr. Zachary. He's here about the cattle my father was planning to buy. He'll be staying in the guest room for a few days. Olivia dismounted, handing her reins to the ranch hand who had appeared to take the horses. Mrs. Finch's eyebrows rose dramatically, but she held her tongue until Vaughn had tipped his hat in greeting and moved to unload his saddlebags. Olivia Cooper, what are you thinking? She whispered urgently. A strange man staying in the house, and you barely widowed, I'm not widowed, Mrs. Finch. I wasn't married, Olivia corrected gently. And we need those cattle if we're going to keep this ranch running. That may be, but please, Olivia cut her off. I know what I'm doing. Mr. Zachary might be able to help us with other matters as well. Mrs. Finch's eyes widened with understanding. You think he can stand against Blackwell? One man? I don't know what I think yet, Olivia admitted. But right now, we need all the allies we can get. Later that evening, after a simple but hearty supper prepared by Mrs. Finch, Olivia found herself sitting on the porch with Vaughn, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The air was cooling rapidly, as it often did in the desert, and Olivia had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Your father built something special here, Vaughn said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. He did, she agreed, her eyes scanning the familiar landscape. I can't bear the thought of losing it. Have you considered selling? The question was asked carefully, without judgment. Olivia turned to look at him sharply. Never. This land is Cooper land. My grandfather homesteaded further east, but the soil was too poor for good grazing. My father spent years searching for the perfect spot to start over. When he found this valley, he said he knew instantly it was where we belonged. Vaughn nodded, taking a sip from the coffee mug in his hands. What about Blackwell? He doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily. No, Olivia admitted. He'll be back. Probably with an offer first, pretending my father's murder never happened. When I refuse, things will get difficult. You seem mighty certain about that refusal. Wouldn't you be? She challenged. Would you sell land to the man who murdered your father? Vaughn's eyes darkened. No, madam, I would not. He set his cup down with a deliberate motion, but fighting him won't be easy. I never expected it would be. Olivia stared out at the darkening landscape. Why are you really here, Mr. Zachary? The cattle story is plausible enough, but I sense there's more to it. For a long moment, Vaughn was silent, and Olivia thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. I've been tracking Blackwell for nearly 2 years, he admitted. He and his gang robbed a bank in Tucson. My brother was the teller. They shot him when he wasn't quick enough with the money. Olivia's breath caught. I'm sorry. He was 19, Vaughn continued, his voice low and tight with controlled emotion. Just a kid, really, working to save money for college back east. The authorities. Same story as here. No witnesses willing to testify. Blackwell has a way of making sure people stay quiet. His jaw clenched. He's wanted in 3 territories, but he's careful. Never stays in one place too long, always has men loyal to him. Until now, Olivia observed. He seems determined to stay in Willow Creek. That's what caught my attention, Vaughn agreed. Something about this place has him digging in his heels. I aim to find out what it is and make him pay for my brother. Olivia studied his profile in the fading light. There was pain etched in the lines around his eyes, but determination too. She recognized the same burning need for justice that smoldered in her own heart. Then it seems we have a common purpose, Mr. Zachary. Vaughn, he corrected. If we're going to be allies, you might as well use my given name. Vaughn, she repeated, testing the name. And I'm Olivia. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and something shifted in the air between them. For the first time since her father's death, Olivia felt a flicker of hope. Well then, Olivia, he said, his voice softening slightly, I believe we have some planning to do. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Olivia rose early, as was her habit, dressing in a practical riding skirt and blouse rather than the morning clothes she'd worn to town. There was work to be done, grief or no grief. She plaited her long auburn hair into a single braid and headed downstairs to find Vaughn already at the kitchen table, deep in conversation with Diego Alvarez, the ranch foreman who had worked for her father for over a decade. "Good morning," she greeted them, accepting the cup of coffee. Mrs. Finch immediately pressed into her hands. Both men stood at her entrance. Diego removed his hat, respect and sadness in his dark eyes. "Señorita Cooper, it is good to see you home." "Thank you for keeping things running while I was in town, Diego," she said sincerely. "Has Mr. Zachary explained about the cattle?" Diego nodded. We were just discussing where to put them. The north pasture has the best grass right now." "That's where I was thinking as well." Olivia took a seat at the table, spreading out a rough map of the property that her father had drawn years ago. "We'll need to fix the fence along this stretch before moving them in. The spring rains washed out part of it." "I've got a couple of men working on it already," Diego assured her. "Should be done by midday." Vaughn watched their exchange with interest. "You know the ranch operations well," he observed. "My father believed a woman should be able to manage on her own if necessary," Olivia explained. "He taught me everything: breeding cycles, grazing rotation, even how to mend fences and brand calves." "Señorita Cooper rides and shoots better than most men," Diego added with a hint of pride. "Her father made sure of it." Vaughn's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Sounds like William Cooper was a man ahead of his time." "He was," Olivia agreed, a pang of grief squeezing her heart. She pushed it aside, focusing on the map. "Diego, have there been any signs of Blackwell's men near our boundaries?" The foreman's expression darkened. "2 riders were watching from the ridge yesterday. They did not come closer, but they were there for some time." "Scouting," Vaughn said grimly. "Assessing your defenses, probably." "Which are minimal," Olivia admitted. "We have Diego and 5 ranch hands, all good men, but they're cowboys, not gunfighters. How many men does Blackwell have?" "At least 15 that I've seen," Diego answered. "Maybe more." Vaughn whistled low. "Those are not favorable odds." "No," Olivia agreed, "but we have one advantage they don't." "What's that?" "This is our home," she said simply. "We know every inch of this land, every hidden draw, every water source, every place to take cover or set an ambush." Vaughn studied her with newfound respect. "You're not planning to just defend, are you? You're thinking of fighting back." "Blackwell killed my father in broad daylight and rode away laughing," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the anger burning beneath her words. "If he thinks I'll wait meekly for him to come finish the job, he's sorely mistaken." Diego shifted uncomfortably. "Señorita, your father would not want you to put yourself in danger." "My father would want me to protect what's ours," she countered. "Isn't that right, Diego?" The foreman couldn't argue with that. He nodded reluctantly. "We need to be smart about this," Vaughn cautioned. "Blackwell didn't get where he is by being careless. If we're going to stop him, we need to understand what he's after." "The land," Olivia said immediately. "The water rights." "Maybe," Vaughn agreed. "But there's plenty of land with water access in the territory. Why is he so fixated on this particular valley?" It was a good question, one Olivia hadn't fully considered in her grief and anger. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I intend to find out." After breakfast, Olivia took Vaughn on a tour of the property, riding along the boundaries of the ranch to give him a better understanding of what they were defending. The Cooper land was diverse rolling grasslands perfect for grazing cattle, patches of woods that provided shelter for wildlife, and the river that cut through the western edge, providing life-giving water year-round. As they rode, Olivia pointed out landmarks and shared stories of her childhood on the ranch. Despite the circumstances, she found herself enjoying Vaughn's company. He was a good listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering occasional observations that showed his own extensive knowledge of ranching. "Your father chose well," he commented as they stopped to rest the horses atop a small rise that overlooked the valley. This land has everything a rancher could want. That's what he always said, Olivia agreed, a soft smile touching her lips at the memory. He used to bring me up here when I was a little girl. We'd sit and watch the sunset, and he'd tell me that someday all of this would be mine to protect and nurture. He'd be proud of how you're honoring that promise. The simple statement touched Olivia more deeply than elaborate condolences had. Thank you, she said quietly. They continued riding, eventually making their way to the river that marked the western boundary of the property. The water flowed steadily, deeper and faster than usual due to the recent spring rains. This is what makes your land so valuable, Vaughn observed, dismounting to examine the riverbank. Reliable water in this territory is worth more than gold. There are other properties with river access, Olivia pointed out, joining him on the ground. What makes ours so special to Blackwell? Vaughn frowned, scanning the terrain with a practiced eye. Mind if we follow the river a ways? I'd like to see where it leads upstream. Of course. They remounted and rode alongside the river for nearly a mile, staying on Cooper land. As they rounded a bend, the landscape changed. The river narrowed and deepened, cutting through a small canyon before widening again. Hold up, Vaughn said suddenly, reining in his horse. He dismounted quickly, handing Olivia his reins before approaching the riverbank on foot. Curious, Olivia dismounted as well, securing both horses to a nearby tree before joining him. What is it? Vaughn was kneeling by the water's edge, examining something in his palm. As Olivia drew closer, she saw tiny flecks of gold glittering against his skin. Is that? She didn't finish the question, the answer obvious. Gold, Vaughn confirmed, standing up. Not much here, but where there are flecks in the river, there might be more upstream, Olivia finished, her mind racing. A deposit, maybe even a vein. Exactly. Vaughn dusted his hands off. And if Blackwell knows about it, that would explain why he's so determined to get this land, Olivia said, the pieces falling into place. The river runs through our property before reaching his holdings downstream. He needs control of the source. It's not just about water rights or even good grazing land, Vaughn agreed. If there's a significant gold deposit upstream, controlling this section of the river would give him first access to anything that washes down. Olivia stared at the water, thoughts tumbling through her mind. My father never mentioned gold. Would he have told you if he'd found some? Vaughn asked gently. She considered this. Maybe not right away. He was cautious by nature. He'd want to be sure before saying anything that might start a gold rush on our land. A new, troubling thought occurred to her. Do you think that's why Blackwell killed him? Because my father discovered the gold. It's possible, Vaughn admitted. If your father refused to sell and Blackwell thought he knew about the gold, he would have seen my father as a threat to his plans, Olivia concluded, anger rising within her again. All the more reason to stand our ground. All the more reason to be careful, Vaughn cautioned. If we're right about this, Blackwell has even more incentive to take your land by any means necessary. They returned to the horses, both lost in thought. As Vaughn helped Olivia mount, their hands touched briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through her despite the gravity of their discovery. Their eyes met for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them before Vaughn cleared his throat and stepped back. We should head back, he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Share what we've found with Diego. He might know if your father ever mentioned gold. Olivia nodded, still feeling the lingering warmth of his touch. Yes, you're right, and we need to prepare. If Blackwell is after gold, he won't wait long to make his move. As they rode back toward the ranch house, Olivia found herself stealing glances at Vaughn. In just 2 days, this stranger had become someone she was beginning to rely on not just for protection against Blackwell, but for the quiet strength he offered. It was dangerous, she knew, to let herself feel anything beyond gratitude toward him. He had his own mission, his own revenge to seek. Once Blackwell was dealt with, Vaughn Zachary would likely ride away, continuing whatever life he had led before their paths crossed. Still, she couldn't help wondering what might have been if they had met under different circumstances. In a world without Blackwell, without the shadow of her father's murder hanging over them, could there have been something more between them? Such thoughts were luxuries she couldn't afford right now. Survival came first, survival and justice. Everything else would have to wait. The news of potential gold on Cooper land changed everything. Diego confirmed that William Cooper had never mentioned finding gold, but the foreman wasn't surprised by the possibility. "There have been small strikes all through these mountains," he explained as they gathered around the kitchen table that evening. "Nothing big enough to cause a rush, but enough to keep prospectors coming through." If Blackwell found evidence of gold upstream from the Cooper property, it would explain his sudden interest in buying up land in this valley, Vaughn theorized. He's been positioning himself to control the entire waterway. Mrs. Finch, who had insisted on joining the conversation despite Olivia's attempts to spare her the worry, snorted in disgust. "That man has the devil in him. Gold just makes him worse." "The question is, what do we do now?" Olivia asked, looking from Diego to Vaughn. "If we're right about the gold, Blackwell will be even more determined. We need allies," Vaughn said decisively. "People in town who might stand with us against Blackwell." Diego shook his head doubtfully. "Most are too afraid. They saw what happened to Senor Cooper." "There must be some who resent Blackwell's growing control," Vaughn pressed. "Other ranchers he's threatened, businesses he's tried to intimidate." "The Hendersons," Olivia suggested. "They own the general store." "They've never liked Blackwell, especially after he tried to force them to extend him credit." "And the Wilsons," Mrs. Finch added. "Their spread borders yours to the south. James Wilson and your father were friends." "Dr. Parker, too," Diego contributed. "He treated one of Blackwell's men who got shot in a card game. Said the man bragged about things they had done." The doctor was disgusted. Vaughn nodded, considering. "It's a start, but we need to be careful how we approach them. Blackwell has eyes everywhere." "I need to go into town tomorrow anyway," Olivia decided. "We're low on supplies and I should check the mail. I can speak with the Hendersons and Dr. Parker while I'm there." "You shouldn't go alone," Vaughn said immediately, concern evident in his voice. "I'll be fine." "Blackwell won't try anything in broad daylight in the middle of town. Not again, at least." She saw the doubt in his expression and added, "Besides, I'll be less conspicuous alone. If you come with me, people will talk, and word might get back to Blackwell that we're planning something." Vaughn clearly didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with her logic. "At least take one of the ranch hands with you. Have him wait with the wagon while you do your business." "I can do that," she conceded. As the others continued discussing potential allies and strategies, Olivia found herself watching Vaughn. In the warm lamplight of the kitchen, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, the tiny scar along his jaw that she was increasingly curious about, and the way his hands, strong and capable, moved as he spoke. There was an intensity about him that drew her eye again and again. Once, he glanced up and caught her looking. Instead of turning away embarrassed, Olivia held his gaze, something passing between them that made her heart beat a little faster. Then Diego asked Vaughn a question, breaking the moment, and the conversation continued. Later, after the others had gone to bed, Olivia found herself unable to sleep. The events of the past few days, coupled with the discovery of gold and the plans they were making, left her mind too active for rest. She slipped out of bed, pulled on a robe over her nightgown, and made her way downstairs, intending to make herself a cup of tea. To her surprise, Vaughn was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her father's old Winchester rifle disassembled in front of him. He looked up as she entered, his hands stilling on the gun parts. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. "Too much on my mind," she admitted, moving to the stove where the kettle still held warm water. "You're up late as well. Thought I'd clean this rifle for you. The action was sticking a bit." He watched as she prepared her tea. "You should try to rest. Tomorrow will be a long day, I know." She brought her cup to the table and sat across from him. "But every time I close my eyes, I see my father falling in the street, or I imagine Blackwell and his men riding up to the house." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this." "Don't apologize," Vaughn said, his voice gentle. "I understand better than most." Olivia looked up at him. "Your brother," he nodded, setting down the gun part he'd been polishing. "For months after it happened, I had the same dreams. Imagining what his last moments were like, what I would do to Blackwell when I found him." "Does it get easier?" she asked softly. "Not easier," he said after a moment of consideration, "but different. The pain changes shape, becomes something you can carry without it crushing you." Olivia sipped her tea, finding unexpected comfort in his words. "How did you cope? After your brother died?" Vaughn's hands resumed their work on the rifle, his movements precise and methodical. "I tracked Blackwell, learned everything I could about him and his operation. It gave me purpose, something to focus on besides the grief." "Is that all you've done these past 2 years? Track him?" "Mostly," he admitted. "I took odd jobs when money ran low, ranch work, guiding, a stint as a deputy in a small town in New Mexico. But always with an eye toward finding Blackwell. And now you have." "Now I have," he agreed, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Though I didn't expect to find someone else with as much reason to hate him as I do." "Life has strange ways of bringing people together," Olivia observed, curling her hands around the warm cup. "That it does." Vaughn began reassembling the rifle with practiced ease. "Your father taught you to shoot with this?" "Yes. He said every woman should know how to defend herself in her home." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. "I was terrible at first, could barely hit the broad side of a barn, but he was patient, kept working with me until I improved. And now I can hit a can at 50 yards, she said with quiet pride, "though I've never had to shoot at a person." "Let's hope it stays that way," Vaughn said, though they both knew it might not be possible given what they were facing. He finished reassembling the rifle and checked the action, which now moved smoothly. "There. Good as new. Thank you." Olivia's gratitude extended beyond the simple repair. In his quiet way, Vaughn had helped ease some of the anxiety that had kept her from sleep. As she stood to take her empty cup to the sink, Vaughn rose as well. They found themselves standing closer than either had intended, the small kitchen suddenly intimate in the low lamplight. Olivia became acutely aware of her state of dress, just a nightgown and robe, and the impropriety of being alone with him at this hour. Yet she didn't step away. Something in his eyes held her in place, a warmth and understanding that spoke to the connection forming between them, forged in shared grief and common purpose. "You should get some rest," Vaughn said finally, his voice low. "Dawn comes early." "Yes," she agreed, though neither of them moved immediately. When she did step back, it was with reluctance. "Good night, Vaughn, and thank you. For the rifle and the company." "Anytime," he replied, and something in his tone suggested he meant it. Olivia made her way back upstairs, her mind still full but somehow calmer. For the first time since her father's death, she slept without nightmares. The trip to town the following day proved both productive and troubling. Olivia, accompanied by Miguel, one of the ranch hands, drove the wagon into Willow Creek shortly before noon. The main street was busy with the usual midday activity shoppers at the general store, men lounging outside the saloon, a few wagons making deliveries to the various businesses. Olivia's first stop was the general store, owned by the Hendersons. Martha Henderson, a kind-faced woman in her 40s who had been a friend to Olivia's mother, greeted her warmly. "Olivia, dear, how are you holding up?" she asked, clasping Olivia's hands in her own. "As well as can be expected," Olivia replied. "Is Mr. Henderson around? I was hoping to speak with both of you." Martha's expression grew serious. "He's in the back. Come along." In the storeroom, away from curious ears, Olivia explained her suspicions about Blackwell's interest in the Cooper land and the evidence of gold they had found. The Hendersons listened intently, exchanging glances that confirmed they weren't entirely surprised. "We've suspected something like this," Robert Henderson admitted when she finished. "Blackwell's been buying up properties at prices well above their worth. A man doesn't do that unless he expects a bigger return." "Has he pressured you to sell the store?" Olivia asked. "Not directly," Martha answered. "But one of his men comes in regularly, makes comments about how much easier life would be if we retired, sold the place to Blackwell. So far it's just talk," Robert added, "but we've seen what happens to those who refuse him outright." Olivia nodded grimly. "That's why I'm here. We need to stand together against him. Are there others in town who feel the same?" The Hendersons shared another look before Robert spoke. "A few. The Wilsons, for certain, Dr. Parker, maybe Thompson at the livery." "What about Sheriff Thompson?" Robert snorted derisively. "The sheriff's useless. Not corrupt exactly, but too cowardly to stand against Blackwell. He conveniently looks the other way when Blackwell's men cause trouble." "We're planning something," Olivia said, lowering her voice further. "I can't say more now, but if you're willing to help when the time comes." "We are," Martha said firmly. "Your father was a good man, Olivia. What happened to him shouldn't go unpunished." "Thank you," Olivia said, feeling a surge of hope. "I'll send word when we're ready to move." Her next stop was Dr. Parker's office. The doctor, a grizzled man in his 60s who had treated every injury and illness Olivia had suffered since childhood, was even more direct in his support. "Been waiting for someone to take a stand against that snake," he said bluntly after Olivia explained her purpose. "Count me in, whatever you need. I've patched up too many folks who have crossed Blackwell's path." "Can you speak with others?" Olivia asked. "Quietly, of course. We need to know who we can trust." "I'll put out some feelers," the doctor promised. "Carefully, mind you, but there are more people fed up with Blackwell than you might think." Encouraged by these meetings, Olivia completed her shopping and was loading the supplies into the wagon when she noticed a familiar figure watching her from across the street. Jed Davis, one of Blackwell's most loyal men, leaned against a hitching post, making no attempt to hide his surveillance. Olivia kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced. She finished loading the wagon, then on impulse decided to make one more stop. If Blackwell was having her watched, she might as well give him something to think about. "Wait here," she told Miguel. "I'll be right back." She crossed the street and entered the land office, where records of property ownership and transactions were kept. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up in surprise. "Miss Cooper, what can I do for you today?" "I'd like to see the records for my property," she said clearly, aware that her request would likely get back to Blackwell. "And any recent land transactions in the valley." The clerk blinked in confusion but complied, bringing out several large ledgers. Olivia made a show of studying them carefully, noting property boundaries and water rights. She had no real need for this information. She knew the Cooper land boundaries by heart, but she wanted to send a message. She was aware of Blackwell's interest in her land and was actively investigating it. When she emerged from the land office 15 minutes later, Davis was still watching. Olivia met his gaze directly this time, lifting her chin in silent challenge before climbing into the wagon beside Miguel. "That one works for Blackwell," Miguel observed quietly as they drove away. "I know," Olivia replied. "And now Blackwell will know we're not sitting idle. It was a calculated risk. Provoking Blackwell might accelerate his plans, but it might also make him careless. Either way, it felt good to take action rather than simply waiting for his next move." As they left town, Olivia caught sight of another familiar face watching their departure. Sheriff Thompson, standing outside his office with an unreadable expression. She wondered which side he would choose when the inevitable confrontation came. Would he finally stand for justice, or continue to look the other way? The return journey to the ranch was uneventful, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice she asked Miguel to stop the wagon so she could scan the surrounding countryside, but saw nothing suspicious. Still, her instincts told her they weren't alone on the road. Vaughn was waiting at the ranch house, his expression a mixture of relief and tension when they pulled into the yard. He helped Olivia down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Everything all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face. "Yes, though we were watched in town. One of Blackwell's men." She filled him in on her meetings with the Hendersons and Dr. Parker as they walked to the house, Miguel following with the supplies. "Good work," Vaughn said when she finished. "We need those allies, but I don't like that Blackwell's keeping tabs on you." "I expected as much," Olivia replied. "Actually, I used it to our advantage. I made a point of examining land records at the office. Let them wonder what I'm looking for." Vaughn's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Clever, but it might force Blackwell's hand sooner rather than later." "We're ready, aren't we?" Olivia challenged. "Or at least we will be soon." "We're getting there," Vaughn allowed. "Diego and I rode the boundaries today. Identified the most likely approaches Blackwell might use. We've started positioning men to keep watch." Inside the house, over coffee, Vaughn spread out a rough map of the property that he and Diego had drawn up. He indicated the spots where they'd posted lookouts and the areas they considered most vulnerable. "The river crossing here is the most direct route from Blackwell's ranch," he explained, pointing to a spot on the western boundary. "But it's also the most obvious. He might try a more roundabout approach, coming in from the north where the terrain offers more cover." Olivia studied the map, noting the defensive positions they'd established. "What about here?" she asked, indicating the southeastern corner of the property. "The old miner's trail comes close to our boundary there." "Good eye," Vaughn nodded approvingly. "Diego mentioned that trail. We'll position someone there tomorrow." As they continued planning, the dynamics between them shifted subtly. Vaughn no longer treated her as someone to be protected, but as a full partner in their strategy. He valued her knowledge of the land and her insights into Blackwell's possible tactics. For her part, Olivia found herself increasingly comfortable with Vaughn's presence, the initial wariness giving way to trust, and something warmer that she wasn't quite ready to name. That evening, after supper, another storm rolled in from the mountains. Heavy rain pounded the roof as thunder rumbled overhead. Olivia stood on the covered porch, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. The air was thick with the scent of rain and wet earth, a smell she had always loved. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Vaughn. He joined her at the railing, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. "Storm might work in our favor," he observed. "Washes away tracks, makes it harder for Blackwell's men to move around undetected." "Unless they're already in position," Olivia countered. "Diego has men watching. If Blackwell's people try anything tonight, we'll know." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching the storm. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that made Olivia jump. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding Vaughn's arm. "Sorry," she said, starting to withdraw her hand, but Vaughn covered it with his own, keeping it in place. "No need to apologize," he said softly. In the dim light from the window behind them, Olivia could see his profile as he turned to look at her. The tension that had been building between them since that first meeting at her father's grave seemed to crystallize in this moment, heightened by the storm raging around them. "Vaughn," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "I know," he replied, as if he understood perfectly the confusion of emotions she was feeling. "This isn't the right time. There's too much at stake." "Yes," she agreed, though part of her wanted to disagree, to forget about Blackwell and gold and revenge, if only for a little while. But Vaughn was right. They couldn't afford distractions, not with Blackwell's threat looming. Whatever was growing between them would have to wait. Still, neither of them moved to break the contact between them. Olivia's hand remained on his arm, his hand covering hers, a small connection that somehow meant everything in that moment. Another flash of lightning, another rumble of thunder, and then the rain began to ease, the storm moving on as quickly as it had arrived. The moment seemed to pass with it, and Vaughn gently released her hand. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "Tomorrow we'll be busy." "Yes," Olivia agreed, suddenly feeling the weight of the day's events. "Good night, Vaughn." As she turned to go inside, Vaughn spoke again. "Olivia," she paused, looking back at him. "I'm glad I'm here," he said simply. "With you." The words warmed her more than they should have. "So am I," she replied softly before disappearing into the house. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the last raindrops on the roof, Olivia found herself thinking not of Blackwell or the danger ahead, but of Vaughn, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. It was foolish, perhaps, to let her heart venture in that direction with so much uncertainty ahead. Yet she couldn't quite bring herself to regret it. Dawn brought clear skies and a sense of anticipation that hung over the ranch like a physical presence. Everyone seemed to feel it. The ranch hands were quieter than usual as they went about their morning chores. Mrs. Finch cooked breakfast with grim determination, and Diego checked and rechecked the rifles they had distributed among the men. Vaughn had risen before everyone, as was becoming his habit. When Olivia came downstairs, she found him on the porch with a cup of coffee, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "See something?" she asked, joining him. "Not yet," he replied. "But they're out there. I can feel it." Olivia nodded, understanding the sensation. "What's our plan for today?" "Diego's sending 2 men to check on the cattle in the north pasture. The rest will stay close to the house, keeping watch." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You should stay inside today." "I will not hide in my own home," Olivia protested immediately. "I know how to use a rifle, and this is my fight more than anyone's." Vaughn studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but stay close to the house, where we can watch each other's backs." The morning passed tensely, but without incident. Olivia busied herself with ranch accounts, sitting at her father's desk by the window where she could keep an eye on the yard. Vaughn moved between the house and the barn, conferring with Diego and checking on the lookouts they had posted. Shortly after midday, one of the ranch hands who had been watching the southern boundary rode in at a gallop, "Riders coming," he called as he dismounted. At least 10 of them, following the creek bed from the south. Vaughn was instantly alert. "Blackwell." "Didn't see him," the ranch hand reported, "but they're his men for sure. I recognize Davis and that Mexican fella with the scar." "How far out?" Diego asked, emerging from the barn with a rifle in hand. 20 minutes, maybe less if they push their horses." Vaughn turned to Olivia, who had come onto the porch at the commotion. "Get inside. Tell Mrs. Finch to stay in the kitchen, away from windows." For once, Olivia didn't argue. She hurried inside to warn the housekeeper, then retrieved her father's Winchester from its place by the door before returning to the porch. Vaughn raised an eyebrow at the rifle in her hands, but said nothing. Diego had already organized the ranch hands, positioning them strategically around the house and barn. The sound of rifles being loaded echoed in the yard. "Remember," Vaughn called to the men, "we don't shoot first, but if they come looking for a fight, we give them one they won't forget." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Olivia found herself counting her heartbeats, trying to keep her breathing steady as she waited beside Vaughn on the porch. He stood slightly in front of her, his body angled to shield her if shooting started. Finally, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger as the riders approached. Olivia gripped her rifle tighter, her palms damp with nervous sweat. "Steady," Vaughn murmured, as much to himself as to her. The riders came into clear view, slowing as they approached the ranch yard. Jed Davis led them, his lean face set in a smirk that made Olivia's blood boil. They stopped about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. "That's far enough," Vaughn called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "State your business." Davis shifted in his saddle, his smirk widening. "We come with a message from Mr. Blackwell. He'd like to speak with Miss Cooper about a business proposition." "Mr. Blackwell can come himself if he wants to talk business," Olivia replied before Vaughn could answer. "Though I'm not interested in any proposition he might have." Davis's eyes narrowed at her defiance. "Mr. Blackwell thought you might say that. He asked me to remind you what happened to your father when he was uncooperative." Vaughn's hand went to his holster, but Olivia placed a restraining touch on his arm. "Is that a threat, Mr. Davis?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the rage coursing through her. "Just a friendly reminder of how things work around here," Davis replied. "Mr. Blackwell is offering a fair price for your land. More than fair, considering the circumstances. You'd be wise to take it and leave this territory while you can. The circumstances being that he murdered my father." Olivia challenged, stepping forward despite Vaughn's attempt to keep her behind him. "You can tell Mr. Blackwell that the Cooper Ranch is not for sale, not to him, not to anyone." Davis's face hardened. "That's a mistake, Miss Cooper. A big one." His eyes shifted to Vaughn. "And who might you be, mister? Don't recall seeing you around these parts before." "Just a friend of the family," Vaughn replied evenly. "One who doesn't take kindly to threats against Miss Cooper." A tense silence fell over the yard. Olivia was acutely aware of Diego and the ranch hands positioned around them, fingers on triggers, waiting for the slightest provocation. Finally, Davis jerked his head in a signal to his men. "We'll be going then, but Mr. Blackwell won't take no for an answer. Think on that, Miss Cooper. Tell Blackwell if he wants this land, he'll have to kill me for it," Olivia called after them as they turned their horses. "And unlike my father, I'll see him coming." Davis didn't respond, but the rigid set of his shoulders suggested her words had hit their mark. They watched in silence as the riders galloped away, dust billowing in their wake. Only when they were well out of sight did Olivia let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, she realized, though whether from fear or anger, she couldn't tell. That was either very brave or very foolish, Vaughn said quietly beside her. Probably both, she admitted, but I meant every word. Vaughn's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. They'll be back, and next time they won't just come with words. I know. Olivia stared at the horizon where the riders had disappeared. But at least now, Blackwell knows exactly where I stand. The confrontation with Blackwell's men changed the atmosphere at the ranch. What had been tense anticipation hardened into grim resolve. Diego doubled the watch rotations, ensuring eyes were on all approaches to the property at all times. Ranch work continued. Cattle still needed tending. Fences still needed mending, but now the men worked in pairs, rifles always within reach. Olivia insisted on taking her turn at watch, despite Vaughn's initial objections. She had grown up on this land, knew every hill and draw, every place where an intruder might hide. After seeing her determination, Vaughn relented, though he made sure her watch shifts coincided with his own. 3 days passed without incident, but the waiting was almost worse than action would have been. Each sunset brought relief that another day had passed safely, but also dread for what the night might bring. Each dawn brought new tension as they wondered if today would be the day Blackwell made his move. On the 4th day after Davis's visit, Olivia rode with Vaughn to check on the cattle in the north pasture. It was a clear, warm morning, the kind that normally would have lifted her spirits. Instead, she found herself scanning the ridgelines constantly, jumping at shadows. "You're getting good at that," Vaughn observed as they rode side by side, watching the high ground looking for movement. "I had a good teacher," she replied with a small smile in his direction. "Your father." "Him too, but I meant you." She adjusted her hat against the sun. "You've taught me a lot these past days." Vaughn looked pleased at her words. "You're a quick study. Most people take a lot longer to develop those instincts." They reached the pasture where the cattle grazed peacefully, seemingly unaware of the human tensions surrounding them. Vaughn dismounted to check a section of fence while Olivia remained on horseback, keeping watch. "Vaughn," she said after a comfortable silence, "what will you do?" "After Blackwell, I mean." He straightened up from the fence, considering her question. "Hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "Been focused on finding him for so long I never really planned for after. Would you go back to Texas?" Olivia kept her tone casual, though the answer mattered more to her than she wanted to admit. "Not much left for me there," he said, walking back to his horse. "Might keep moving west. Hear California's growing fast these days." "Oh." Olivia tried to hide her disappointment. "I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities there." Vaughn looked at her thoughtfully as he remounted. "What about you? After all this is over, what will you do with the ranch?" "Keep running it," she said without hesitation. "It's my home, my legacy. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Olivia couldn't help wondering if Vaughn ever considered staying. The idea of him riding away once Blackwell was dealt with left an emptiness in her chest that she wasn't prepared for. As they crested a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding countryside, Vaughn suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for Olivia to do the same. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "Smoke," he said, pointing to the southeast, "coming from town direction." Olivia followed his gaze and saw it a dark column rising against the blue sky. "That's not a controlled burn," she said, anxiety rising. "It's too much smoke." "No, it's not," Vaughn agreed grimly. "Something's wrong. We need to get back to the ranch." They rode hard, pushing their horses faster than was wise on the uneven terrain. As they approached the ranch house, they saw Diego running toward them, his face tight with worry. "Willow Creek is burning," he called as they dismounted. "Ryder just came from town." The general store, the saloon, several houses all on fire, Blackwell, Vaughn said, his voice hard with certainty. The rider said his men were seen starting the fires, Diego confirmed. They're saying it's punishment for those who stand against him. The Hendersons, Olivia gasped, remembering her conversation with them just days ago. Dr. Parker. They're being targeted because they agreed to help us. We need to go to town, Vaughn decided. Now, Diego, keep the men here, guard the ranch. Blackwell might be using this as a distraction. I'm coming with you, Olivia said firmly, already checking her rifle. Vaughn looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. Stay close to me. They took fresh horses and rode for Willow Creek at a gallop, the smoke growing larger and darker as they approached. The smell reached them before they even entered the town, burning wood, fabric, and something else, something sickeningly sweet that Olivia refused to identify. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The general store was engulfed in flames, its wooden structure crackling and groaning as the fire consumed it. Further down the street, the saloon was similarly ablaze. People formed bucket brigades, desperately trying to keep the fire from spreading to adjacent buildings, while others searched for loved ones or salvaged what possessions they could from threatened homes. Olivia scanned the crowd frantically, looking for the Hendersons. I don't see them, she said, her voice tight with worry. There, Vaughn pointed to a group gathered near the church, which was serving as a makeshift refuge. I think that's Martha Henderson. They dismounted and pushed through the crowd. Martha Henderson sat on a bench, a blanket around her shoulders despite the day's heat, her face smudged with soot and streaked with tears. Mrs. Henderson, Olivia called, rushing to her side. Are you all right? Where's Mr. Henderson? Martha looked up, her eyes focusing slowly on Olivia's face. Olivia, oh Olivia. Her voice broke. Robert, he went back in for the ledger, our accounts, our inventory. He said we'd need it to rebuild. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. He never came out. Olivia felt as if she'd been struck. She sank onto the bench beside Martha, taking the older woman's hands in hers. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. This is my fault. I came to you for help and now. No, Martha said firmly, squeezing Olivia's hands. This is Blackwell's doing, not yours. Robert and I knew the risks when we agreed to stand with you. Vaughn, who had been speaking with others in the group, returned to Olivia's side. It was definitely Blackwell's men, he reported grimly. They rode in around noon, started fires in strategic locations, then shot at anyone who tried to put them out. Sheriff Thompson tried to intervene and took a bullet in the shoulder. And Dr. Parker? Olivia asked, dreading the answer. His clinic was spared, Vaughn said, bringing a small measure of relief. He's tending to the wounded in the church. Olivia stood, determination replacing shock. We need to help these people. For the next several hours, they worked alongside the townspeople, fighting fires, treating injuries, and helping to salvage what could be saved. The destruction was extensive but could have been worse. A change in wind direction had kept the flames from engulfing the entire town. As dusk fell, the fires were finally under control. Exhausted and soot-covered, Olivia and Vaughn made their way to the church to check on those who had been injured or left homeless by the day's events. Inside, pews had been pushed aside to make room for pallets where the wounded lay. Dr. Parker moved among them, his elderly frame somehow finding the energy to continue despite the grueling day. When he saw Olivia and Vaughn, he beckoned them over. Miss Cooper, Mr. Zachary. His voice was hoarse from smoke. I hoped you'd come. How bad is it, doctor? Olivia asked, looking around at the improvised hospital. 3 dead, including Mr. Henderson. A dozen injured, mostly burns and smoke inhalation. A few gunshot wounds. He rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "Could have been much worse." "This is just the beginning," Vaughn said quietly. "Blackwell's sending a message. Anyone who stands against him will suffer. Then we need to make sure he falls before he can do more damage," the doctor replied with surprising vehemence. "I've lived in this town for 30 years, helped bring most of these people into the world. I'll be damned if I'll watch Blackwell destroy everything we've built." Olivia glanced around the church, at the faces of the people who had lost homes, businesses, loved ones. The fear was palpable, but there was anger too, a simmering rage that hadn't been there before. "Blackwell may have overplayed his hand," she observed. "People who were afraid to stand against him before might feel differently now." "That's what I'm counting on," Vaughn agreed. "Fear only works as long as people believe they are safer obeying than resisting. Blackwell just showed them that no one is safe." They were interrupted by a commotion at the church doors. Sheriff Thompson, his arm in a sling, pushed his way through the crowd toward them. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, his face haggard with pain and what looked like shame. "Miss Cooper," he said, stopping in front of Olivia. "I need to speak with you, and Mr. Zachary." Olivia exchanged a glance with Vaughn, who nodded slightly. They followed the sheriff to a corner of the church where they could speak privately. "I failed this town today," Thompson began without preamble. "I've been failing it for months, looking the other way while Blackwell gained power, telling myself there was nothing one man could do against his kind. And now," Vaughn prompted when the sheriff fell silent. "Now I'm done being a coward." Thompson's jaw set with resolve. "I sent a telegram to the territorial marshal before the telegraph office burned, told him everything, the extortion, the threats, the killings, asked for help." "Will he send it?" Olivia asked. "Maybe. But it'll take time, and we don't have much of that." The sheriff looked directly at Vaughn. "I hear you've been organizing resistance at the Cooper Ranch. I want in." Vaughn studied him skeptically. "Why the sudden change of heart?" "Because I watched Robert Henderson die today," Thompson said, his voice cracking. "A good man who never harmed anyone. And because I took an oath to protect this town, and it's time I lived up to it." Olivia could see the struggle in Vaughn's face, the desire to accept any help versus the wariness of trusting someone who had failed them before. She made the decision for him. "We need every gun we can get, Sheriff," she said. "If you're truly ready to stand against Blackwell, we welcome your help." Thompson nodded gratefully. "What's your plan?" Vaughn hesitated, then outlined what they had been discussing at the ranch, using their knowledge of the land to set traps for Blackwell's men, cutting them down in smaller groups rather than facing the entire gang at once. "It's a good strategy," Thompson acknowledged. "But after today, Blackwell will be expecting resistance. He'll come with everything he has." "Then we need to be ready for that too," Olivia said firmly. "How many men in town would be willing to fight after today?" "Most of them," Thompson said without hesitation. "The question is whether they're fighters. Having the will isn't the same as having the skill." "We train them," Vaughn decided, quickly. "Basic shooting, how to take cover, how to work as a unit. And we need to move fast," Olivia added. "Blackwell won't wait long after this. He'll want to press his advantage while people are still reeling from the fires." They continued planning well into the night, with Dr. Parker and several other townspeople joining the discussion. By the time Olivia and Vaughn prepared to ride back to the ranch, a rough plan had taken shape. The sheriff would organize the townsmen who were willing to fight, while Vaughn would train them in basic tactics. Meanwhile, Olivia would coordinate with neighboring ranchers like the Wilsons to form a second line of defense. As they mounted their horses for the ride home, Olivia felt a strange mixture of dread and hope. The day's events had been terrible, but they had also galvanized the community in a way she hadn't thought possible. For the first time since her father's death, she believed they might actually succeed in bringing Blackwell to justice. The ride back to the ranch was silent, both of them lost in thought. The smell of smoke clung to their clothes and hair, a constant reminder of what they had witnessed. When they finally reached the ranch house, Diego was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Gracias a Dios," he breathed when he saw them. "We saw the smoke, heard the shooting. We feared the worst." "It was bad," Vaughn confirmed as they dismounted, "but it could have been worse. The town still stands and the people are angry. They're ready to fight." Inside, over much-needed food and coffee, they briefed Diego on what had happened and the plans they had made. The foreman listened gravely, asking occasional questions about logistics and timing. "It will work," he said when they finished. "If everyone does their part, it will work. But there will be more bloodshed before it is over." "I know," Olivia said softly. "But what choice do we have? If we do nothing, Blackwell wins and everyone suffers anyway." Later, after Diego had gone to check on the night watch, Olivia found herself alone with Vaughn in the kitchen. They were both exhausted, dirty from the fires, and emotionally drained. Yet neither seemed inclined to seek their beds just yet. "You should try to rest," Vaughn said, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "I'm not sure I can sleep," Olivia admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the fires, hear Mrs. Henderson's voice when she told me about her husband." "I know." Vaughn's own eyes held shadows that went beyond physical tiredness. "It's the price of leading, the weight of decisions, of consequences." "Is that what I'm doing? Leading?" The question was genuine. "Yes," he said simply. "These people are following you, Olivia. They're risking everything because they believe in what you're fighting for." The responsibility of that realization settled heavily on her shoulders. What if I'm wrong? What if standing against Blackwell only brings more death? "Then at least we died on our feet instead of living on our knees," Vaughn said, his voice low but intense. "But I don't think you're wrong. What I saw today in town, those people are ready to reclaim their lives, their community. They just needed someone to show them it was possible." Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the strength and conviction in his face despite the exhaustion. In that moment, she realized how much she had come to depend on him, not just for protection or strategy, but for the steady belief he had in her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for believing in this fight." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," he replied, and the simple honesty in his voice made her heart swell. Without overthinking it, Olivia closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Vaughn hesitated for only a moment before responding, his hand coming up to cradle her face as he deepened the kiss. Time seemed to suspend as they stood there in the kitchen, the day's horrors momentarily forgotten in the warmth of their connection. When they finally parted, Olivia felt breathless, her heart racing with emotions too complex to name. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered, though she couldn't bring herself to regret it. "Maybe not," Vaughn agreed, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "But I'm glad you did." "Vaughn," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. That this was complicated. That the timing was impossible. That despite all that, she couldn't imagine facing the days ahead without him. He saved her from having to choose. "We don't need to figure everything out tonight," he said gently. "Let's just take each day as it comes. Together." "Together," she echoed, finding comfort in the simple word. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then stepped back, restoring a respectable distance between them. "Get some rest, Olivia. I'll see you in the morning." As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom a few minutes later, Olivia knew she should be focused on the challenges ahead, training townspeople to fight, coordinating with neighboring ranchers, preparing for Blackwell's inevitable attack. Yet her mind kept returning to that kiss, to the look in Vaughn's eyes afterward, to the promise of together that somehow made the impossible task before them seem manageable. For the first time in weeks, despite everything, she fell asleep with a smile on her lips. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. As planned, Sheriff Thompson organized the townsmen who were willing to fight, while Vaughn rode into town daily to train them. Olivia, meanwhile, visited neighboring ranches, securing promises of support from families who had their own reasons to fear or hate Blackwell. The Cooper Ranch became the headquarters of their resistance. Men came and went at all hours, bringing news, seeking instructions, delivering supplies. Mrs. Finch kept the kitchen running continuously, feeding the growing number of people involved in their plans. Diego coordinated the ranch hands who maintained a constant watch on the property boundaries, alert for any sign of Blackwell's men. 5 days after the fires in town, James Wilson, whose ranch bordered the Cooper property to the south, rode in with news. "Blackwell's gathering his forces," he reported as they gathered around the kitchen table. "One of my hands saw at least 20 armed men at his ranch yesterday. Word is he's bringing in more from as far as Arizona." "He's preparing for war," Vaughn said grimly. "How are the townsmen coming along?" "Better than I expected," Sheriff Thompson admitted. "Most can hit what they aim at now, and they're learning to work together. But they're still farmers and shopkeepers, not gunfighters." "They don't need to be gunfighters," Olivia pointed out. "They just need to hold their positions and follow the plan." The plan they had developed was relatively simple. Rather than waiting for Blackwell to attack either the town or the ranch, they would set an ambush along the main road between the two. Willow Creek sat in a small valley surrounded by rocky hills that offered perfect positions for shooters. If they could lure Blackwell and his men into that valley, they could catch them in crossfire from multiple directions. "The question is how to get Blackwell to commit his forces where and when we want," Vaughn said, studying the crude map they had drawn of the area. "We give him what he wants," Olivia said suddenly. "Or at least make him think we are." All eyes turned to her. "What do you mean?" Thompson asked. "We let word get back to him that I've decided to sell the ranch and leave the territory." Olivia's mind was racing now, the plan forming as she spoke. "That after the fires in town, I realized it was too dangerous to stay. We'll even have a lawyer draw up fake sale documents." "He won't believe it," Wilson objected. "Not after you've been so adamant about keeping the land." "He will if we make it convincing," Olivia insisted. "If we let him think the resistance is falling apart, that people are too scared after the fires." "It could work," Vaughn said slowly, considering the idea. "Blackwell's arrogant. He'd believe people would give up in the face of his show of force. So we let him think he's won," Thompson summarized. "That you're selling out and leaving. Then what?" "Then I make a very public departure from the ranch," Olivia continued. "Wagon loaded with belongings, heading for the stage stop in Willow Creek. Blackwell will want to make sure I'm really leaving. He might even want to gloat. And when he and his men follow you into town." Vaughn picked up her train of thought. "They ride right into our trap," she finished. The room fell silent as everyone considered the plan. It was risky, everything hinged on Blackwell taking the bait and following the expected route. But if it worked, they would have the advantage of choosing the battlefield and controlling the timing. "It's our best chance," Vaughn said finally. "Better than waiting for him to attack on his terms." One by one, the others nodded in agreement. The plan was set in motion immediately. Sheriff Thompson returned to town to brief the men there, while James Wilson rode to alert the neighboring ranchers who had agreed to help. Diego began positioning ranch hands at strategic points along the planned ambush route, ensuring they could relay messages quickly when the time came. Olivia, meanwhile, had perhaps the most difficult task. She had to make her supposed surrender convincing. She wrote a letter to Blackwell, formally agreeing to sell the Cooper ranch for his original offered price. The letter was deliberately humble, even fearful in tone, suggesting that the fires in town had broken her spirit. "Will he believe it?" she asked Vaughn as she sealed the envelope. "After everything I've said and done, people change their minds when faced with enough violence," Vaughn replied. "Blackwell knows that better than most. It's how he's built his power." The letter was delivered to Blackwell's ranch by one of the townspeople who had occasionally worked for him and wasn't known to be connected to the resistance. Now they could only wait and see if he took the bait. 2 tense days passed. Preparations continued, with men positioned in the hills overlooking the road to town, supplies cached at strategic locations, and signals arranged to coordinate their forces. Still, there was no word from Blackwell. On the morning of the third day, a rider approached the Cooper ranch carrying a white flag. Diego intercepted him at the boundary and escorted him to the house, where Olivia and Vaughn waited on the porch. The messenger was one of Blackwell's men, though not one Olivia recognized. He handed her a sealed letter without dismounting. "Mr. Blackwell expects your answer today," he said curtly. Olivia took the letter and broke the seal, scanning its contents quickly. Blackwell had accepted her offer to sell, but had added conditions. She was to leave the territory immediately after the sale, taking nothing but personal belongings. Additionally, he wanted a public signing of the documents in town, to ensure there are no misunderstandings. It was exactly what they had hoped for. Blackwell wanted to humiliate her publicly, to show everyone in Willow Creek that he had won. "Tell Mr. Blackwell I agree to his terms," Olivia said, keeping her voice subdued. "I'll be in town tomorrow at noon for the signing." The messenger nodded and rode away. As soon as he was out of sight, Olivia turned to Vaughn with a triumphant smile. "He's taking the bait," she said. "Tomorrow at noon, exactly as we planned." Vaughn nodded, though his expression remained serious. "It's almost too perfect. Blackwell's not a fool. He might suspect a trap." "Then we need to make sure it doesn't look like one," Olivia said determinedly. "I'll go into town alone, just as a defeated woman would. You and the others will already be in position, hidden." "I don't like the idea of you facing Blackwell alone, even for a few minutes," Vaughn admitted. "Neither do I," Diego agreed, having joined them on the porch. "It is too dangerous, señorita." "It's the only way," Olivia insisted. "If I arrive with an escort, Blackwell will be suspicious. He needs to believe I've given up." The final preparations were made throughout the day and into the evening. Messengers rode to town and to neighboring ranches, confirming positions and timing. By nightfall, everything was in place. All that remained was for Olivia to play her part convincingly the next day. After supper, the house grew quiet as everyone sought rest before the coming confrontation. Olivia found sleep elusive, her mind replaying all the ways their plan could go wrong. Eventually, she gave up trying and went downstairs, intending to make some tea. She found Vaughn on the porch as she had so many nights before. He turned at the sound of the door, and even in the dim light, she could see the concern in his eyes. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked as she joined him at the railing. "Too much thinking," she admitted. "About tomorrow, about what happens after." "After we deal with Blackwell, you mean?" "Yes." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind for days. "Will you leave once it's over?" Vaughn was silent for a long moment, staring out at the dark landscape. "I came here with one purpose, to find the man who killed my brother and make him pay. I never thought beyond that goal." "And now?" Olivia held her breath, waiting for his answer. He turned to look at her, his expression softening. Now I'm not so sure. These past weeks, they've changed things, changed me. How so? She prompted when he paused. I've been drifting for 2 years, Olivia. Moving from place to place, taking odd jobs, always with my eyes on the horizon looking for Blackwell. I haven't had a home, haven't allowed myself to form attachments. He took a step closer to her. Until now. Olivia's heart quickened at his words, at the implication behind them. What are you saying, Vaughn? I'm saying that for the first time in a very long time, I'm thinking about what I want beyond revenge. His voice lowered. And what I want, if you'll have me, is to stay here with you. Her breath caught. You want to stay at the ranch? If that's what you want too, he said, suddenly uncertain. I know it's fast that we've only known each other a short time, but sometimes life doesn't give us the luxury of moving slowly. No, Olivia agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't. She stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between them. This time when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no questioning. The kiss deepened, filled with all the emotion they had been holding back, fear for tomorrow, hope for the future, and something more profound that neither was ready to name but both felt intensely. When they finally parted, Vaughn kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said softly, know that meeting you has been worth everything that came before. We're going to succeed, Olivia said with newfound conviction. And then we'll have all the time in the world to figure out what comes next. Together. Together, he echoed, sealing the promise with another kiss. Morning arrived all too quickly. Olivia dressed with care, choosing a simple blue dress that she had often worn before her father's death, not her mourning clothes, which would be too obvious a signal, but nothing too fine either. She wanted to look defeated but not suspicious. Mrs. Finch helped her pack a trunk with clothing and a few personal items to complete the illusion. The older woman's eyes were red-rimmed with worry, though she tried to hide it. You be careful, child, she said as she folded the last dress. That Blackwell is a snake. Don't turn your back on him for a second. I won't, Olivia promised, squeezing Mrs. Finch's hand. And I'll be back before sundown, you'll see. Downstairs, Vaughn and Diego were making final checks of their weapons. Both looked up as Olivia descended the stairs, concern evident in their expressions. Remember, Vaughn said, coming to meet her, once you're in town, go straight to the lawyer's office. Thompson will have men watching. Don't engage with Blackwell any more than necessary. I know the plan, Olivia assured him. I'll be fine. Diego had already hitched the wagon and loaded her trunk. It was time. Vaughn walked her outside, keeping his voice low as they crossed the yard. I'll be watching from the ridge east of town, he told her. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, I'll signal the others and we'll move in early. Stick to the plan, Olivia said firmly. We only get one chance at this. I can handle Blackwell for the few minutes it takes to spring the trap. Vaughn helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand lingering on hers. Be careful, he said simply, though his eyes conveyed everything words couldn't. You too, she replied, giving his hand a final squeeze before taking up the reins. As she drove away from the ranch house, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear. Certainly she was about to face the man who had murdered her father. Determination, too, and hope that their plan would succeed. But underlying it all was a new feeling, one that had been growing steadily since that first kiss in the kitchen. Love. The realization didn't shock her as much as she might have expected. Perhaps because it felt inevitable, a natural progression of everything they had experienced together. Whether they had known each other for weeks or years seemed irrelevant in the face of the connection they had formed. The journey to town took just over an hour. As she drove, Olivia rehearsed her role, the defeated young woman, giving up her family legacy out of fear. It went against everything she felt, but she knew she could play the part convincingly. Too much depended on it. Willow Creek came into view, still showing the scars of the fires. Several buildings remained partially destroyed, their charred timbers stark against the clear blue sky. The street was quieter than usual, with fewer people going about their business. To a casual observer, it might have appeared that the town was still in shock, its spirit broken by Blackwell's attack. Olivia knew better. Behind closed doors and shuttered windows, the townspeople were waiting, armed and ready. In the hills surrounding the valley, more men were positioned, rifles trained on the road. If all went according to plan, Blackwell would ride into a carefully laid trap. She pulled the wagon to a stop outside the lawyer's office, taking a deep breath before climbing down. As expected, several people watched her arrival with varying degrees of curiosity and sympathy. She kept her head down, playing her part as she entered the office. Inside, Mr. Parker, the town's elderly lawyer, greeted her with a subtle nod. They had briefed him on the plan the day before, and he had the fake sale documents prepared. "Miss Cooper," he said loudly enough to be heard by anyone passing outside. "Mr. Blackwell is expected shortly. Please have a seat." Olivia sat in one of the straight-back chairs facing the desk, arranging her skirts with hands that trembled slightly, not entirely an act. Now came the waiting, the hardest part. She stared at the documents on the desk, the papers that would supposedly transfer her family's legacy to the man who had destroyed it. 20 minutes passed, each feeling like an hour. Finally, the door opened, and Silas Blackwell strode in. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a thick mustache, dressed in expensive clothes that set him apart from most men in the territory. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Olivia with undisguised satisfaction. "Miss Cooper," he said, removing his hat. "I'm pleased you've come to your senses. This arrangement will be better for everyone, I assure you." Olivia forced herself to remain seated, to keep her expression neutral despite the rage that surged through her at the sight of him. This was the man who had shot her father down in the street. The man responsible for the fires that had killed Robert Henderson and others. Every instinct screamed at her to confront him, to accuse him of his crimes. Instead, she nodded stiffly. "Mr. Blackwell," he smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "I've brought the agreed-upon payment." He set a leather pouch on the desk. "You can count it if you wish, though my word should be sufficient." "That won't be necessary," Mr. Parker interjected, sliding the sale documents forward. "If you'll both sign here, the transaction will be complete." Blackwell took the offered pen and signed with a flourish. Then he pushed the papers toward Olivia, watching her intently. This was the moment of truth. Once she signed, the trap would be sprung. According to their plan, Sheriff Thompson would be watching from across the street. As soon as the documents were signed, he would give the signal for their forces to move into position. Olivia took the pen, her hand steady now that the moment had arrived. She signed her name clearly at the bottom of the page, then set the pen down with deliberate calm. "There," she said, meeting Blackwell's gaze directly for the first time. "It's done." Something in her tone or expression must have alerted him that all was not as it seemed. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Indeed it is. The Cooper Ranch now belongs to me, and you, Miss Cooper, will be on the afternoon stage out of this territory." "As agreed." "The stage doesn't leave until 3 o'clock, she replied. "I have some time yet." Through the window, Olivia could see movement on the street. Sheriff Thompson crossing to the telegraph office, where he would signal the men in the hills. Their plan was in motion. Blackwell followed her gaze, his suspicion deepening. "Perhaps we should see you to the stage depot now to ensure there are no Complications. Before Olivia could respond, the door opened again. Jed Davis stepped in, his expression urgent. "Boss, we got trouble. Riders coming in from the north and east. Looks like Wilson and his men." Blackwell's face hardened as understanding dawned. He turned back to Olivia, fury replacing satisfaction in his eyes. "You think you're clever, don't you? Setting a trap for me." "I don't know what you're talking about," Olivia said, maintaining her act though she knew it was crumbling. "I've signed your papers, taken your money. Our business is concluded." "Our business is far from concluded," Blackwell snarled, reaching for his gun. "You're your father's daughter, after all, too stubborn for your own good." Several things happened at once. Mr. Parker lunged across his desk, knocking Blackwell's arm just as he drew his weapon. The gun discharged, the bullet splintering the wall behind Olivia's head. Davis, reacting to the gunshot, pulled his own weapon and fired at the lawyer, hitting him in the shoulder. Olivia dove for cover behind the desk as more gunfire erupted outside. Their ambush was being triggered earlier than planned. Through the window, she could see Blackwell's men, who had been waiting nearby, engaging with townspeople who emerged from buildings with rifles. "Get her!" Blackwell shouted to Davis as he ran for the door. "She's the one organizing this resistance." Davis advanced toward the desk, gun raised, but before he could fire, the window shattered inward as a shot from outside caught him in the chest. He crumpled to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Olivia crawled to Mr. Parker, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder but still conscious. "Can you move?" she asked urgently. "Go," he gasped. "Don't worry about me. Stop Blackwell." Outside, the street had erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed between buildings as Blackwell's men exchanged shots with townspeople who had positioned themselves in windows and doorways. From the hills came the crack of rifles as the ranchers Olivia had recruited joined the fight. She needed a weapon. Staying low, she moved to Davis's body and took his revolver, checking to ensure it was loaded. Then, keeping to the shadows of the building, she looked for Blackwell. He wasn't difficult to spot. Unlike his men, who had taken cover wherever they could find it, Blackwell stood in the middle of the street, shouting orders and firing at any movement he saw. His confidence, his arrogance, made him believe he was untouchable even now. Olivia aimed carefully, but before she could fire, Blackwell spotted her. With surprising speed for a man his size, he ducked behind a water trough as her shot went wide. "Cooper," he bellowed, "you think these townspeople can save you? I've got 20 men to your handful of shopkeepers." "Count again." "Blackwell," Sheriff Thompson's voice rang out from the direction of his office. "Look around you." Indeed, Blackwell's advantage was rapidly disappearing. The carefully positioned men in the hills were picking off his gunmen one by one. Meanwhile, the townspeople, though less experienced, had the advantage of familiar territory and protection of buildings. Blackwell seemed to realize his position was deteriorating. He made a dash toward his horse, which was tethered nearby. Olivia fired again but missed as he vaulted into the saddle. "He's getting away," she shouted, breaking cover to pursue him. Blackwell spurred his horse down the main street, heading out of town. Olivia ran to her wagon, intending to follow, but stopped short at the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the direction Blackwell was fleeing. Vaughn appeared at the end of the street, rifle raised, directly in Blackwell's path. The gang leader reined in his horse hard, nearly unseating himself as he changed direction, veering down a side street. "Olivia," Vaughn called, spotting her. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but Blackwell, I see him." Vaughn turned his horse to pursue, disappearing down the same side street. Olivia wanted desperately to follow, but knew she would only slow Vaughn down. Instead, she turned her attention back to the main street, where the fighting was beginning to subside. Several of Blackwell's men lay dead or wounded. Others had thrown down their weapons, surrendering to the sheriff and townspeople. For several minutes, the only sounds were sporadic gunfire from the direction Vaughn and Blackwell had gone, growing more distant as the chase continued. Then a single shot rang out, louder and more final than the others. Silence followed. Olivia's heart seemed to stop. Had that last shot been Vaughn's or Blackwell's? The uncertainty was unbearable. She started running toward the sound, ignoring shouts from Sheriff Thompson to stay back. She had just reached the edge of town when a rider appeared on the horizon. Even at a distance, she recognized Vaughn's silhouette. He was alone, riding slowly, something draped across his saddle in front of him. As he drew closer, Olivia could see it was a body Blackwell's body. Vaughn's face was grim but resolute as he rode into town, stopping in front of the sheriff's office where a crowd had gathered. "Silas Blackwell," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. "He won't trouble this town or any other again." A cheer went up from the townspeople, a release of tension and fear that had built over months of Blackwell's tyranny. Sheriff Thompson stepped forward to officially confirm Blackwell's death, but Olivia had eyes only for Vaughn. He dismounted, passing the reins to a bystander, and walked directly to her. There was blood on his shirt, not his own, she realized with relief, and his face was streaked with dirt and sweat. But his eyes, when they met hers, held the same steadiness she had come to depend on. "It's over," he said simply. "You're all right?" she asked, scanning him for injuries. "I'm fine. He led me on a chase to the ridge, thought he could lose me in the rocks, but I know that terrain now thanks to you." A small smile touched his lips. He didn't expect that. Relief washed over Olivia, so powerful it made her knees weak. Vaughn seemed to sense it, stepping closer to support her with a hand at her elbow. "What happened?" she asked. "He ran out of options," Vaughn said grimly. "Cornered, he tried to shoot his way out. I was faster." The simplicity of the statement belied what Olivia knew must have been a desperate, dangerous confrontation. But it was done. Blackwell was dead. His reign of terror ended. As the initial excitement subsided, the town began the process of dealing with the aftermath. The wounded were taken to Dr. Parker's clinic, while the dead, mostly Blackwell's men, were laid out for identification. Sheriff Thompson organized a group to ride to Blackwell's ranch and inform his remaining men of their leader's demise, offering them the choice to leave the territory or face justice for their crimes. Through it all, Vaughn stayed by Olivia's side, a quiet, steadying presence. They helped where they could, tending minor injuries, comforting those who had lost loved ones in the fight, assuring worried townsfolk that the danger had truly passed. It was late afternoon by the time they were able to return to the Cooper ranch. Diego and the hands who had remained behind to guard the property greeted them with relief and celebration when they heard the news. Mrs. Finch prepared a special dinner, and a sense of joy permeated the house that had been absent since William Cooper's death. After the meal, as the celebrations continued in the bunkhouse, Olivia found herself once again on the porch with Vaughn. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in gold and amber, a fitting end to a day of reckoning and new beginnings. "I still can't quite believe it's over," Olivia said, watching the changing light on the distant mountains. "That Blackwell is really gone." "It may take some time to sink in," Vaughn agreed, "for all of us." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, shoulders just touching, content in each other's company and the knowledge that the threat that had brought them together was no more. "What happens now?" Olivia finally asked, turning to face him. "With us, I mean." Vaughn's expression softened as he looked at her. "That depends on you, I suppose. Last night I told you I wanted to stay. That hasn't changed. but I understand if you need time or if you've reconsidered in the light of day." "I haven't reconsidered," Olivia said firmly. "I want you to stay too. It's just, everything's happened so fast. We met because of violence and revenge. Now that those reasons are gone, you're wondering if what's between us is real," Vaughn finished for her, "or if it was just born of shared danger and common purpose." "Yes," she admitted. "Though I believe it's real. At least it is for me." "For me too," Vaughn said, taking her hands in his. "What I feel for you, Olivia Cooper, has nothing to do with Blackwell or gold or anything else. It's about who you are, your courage, your determination, your heart." Her heart swelled at his words. "I feel the same way, but I don't want to rush into anything. We both need time to just be without the shadow of Blackwell hanging over us." "I agree," Vaughn said, surprising her, "which is why I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by his directness. "Not yet," a smile tugged at his lips. "Not yet. But I am asking if I can court you properly. No guns, no ambushes, no revenge plots. Just a man and a woman getting to know each other in peaceful times." The idea held immense appeal. After all they had been through together, the thought of exploring their relationship without the constant threat of danger was both exciting and slightly terrifying in its normalcy. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." His hands reached for her then, gently cupping her face as he had that night in the kitchen. This time, however, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty in his touch. Her hands trembled as he reached for her, but not from fear, from anticipation, from the intensity of emotion that passed between them. "This kiss," the cowboy said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers through her, "will be the first of 1,000. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate, a beginning rather than an ending. Olivia felt something settle within her, a sense of rightness that transcended the chaos of recent weeks. Whatever came next, they would face it together. When they finally parted, Vaughn kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you, Olivia Cooper," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day at your father's grave, though I was too focused on revenge to recognize it." "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easily now that the last barriers between them had fallen. "Enough to wait until we're both ready for what comes next." They sealed their understanding with another kiss before returning inside, hand in hand. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its details but secure in its foundation. They had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and emerged into light. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them as they had met Blackwell together, with courage and determination. In the months that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. The buildings destroyed in the fires were rebuilt, often improved from their original state. Blackwell's former holdings were divided among those who had suffered most under his regime, with the Cooper Ranch reclaiming the water rights that had been part of the original dispute. Vaughn, true to his word, stayed. He proved to be as skilled at ranching in peacetime as he had been at strategy during their conflict with Blackwell. Under his and Olivia's joint management, the Cooper Ranch thrived, expanding its herds and reputation throughout the territory. Their courtship progressed at a measured pace, though there was never any real doubt about its eventual outcome. They complemented each other in ways neither had anticipated. Olivia's practicality balancing Vaughn's occasional impulsiveness, his steady optimism tempering her tendency toward worry. 6 months to the day after Blackwell's death, Vaughn proposed properly, with a ring he had ordered specially from San Francisco. They were married in the spring, with the entire town turning out to celebrate the union that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. On their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home together, Vaughn reminded her of his promise. "One down," he said, kissing her softly. 999 to go." Olivia laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "I believe you're falling behind schedule, Mr. Zachary." "Then I'd better catch up," he replied with a grin, drawing her into his arms once more. As the years passed, their love only deepened. They had children, 2 boys and a girl who grew up hearing the story of how their parents met and fell in love during one of the darkest chapters in Willow Creek's history. The tale became something of a legend in the region, embellished with each telling but true in its essentials. That love could flourish even in the harshest circumstances, that courage and justice would eventually prevail, and that sometimes the greatest adventures began with a simple promise. The Cooper-Zachary Ranch, as it came to be known, remained a cornerstone of the community for generations. And though Olivia and Vaughn eventually grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they never forgot that moment on the porch when everything changed, when her hands trembled as he reached for her, and a cowboy's promise of 1,000 kisses began a love story that would endure far beyond their lifetimes.